Good afternoon, my name is Skylar Arns, and I will be talking to you today about accountability. The reason why I chose accountability is because I feel like we have an issue at my current school with kids being accountable, coaches being accountable, doing their job. So I feel like this is something that I could use and apply it to the current situation that I am currently in. A nice quote here, okay, children that aren't taught accountability for their actions grow up to become adults that think nothing they do is wrong. Okay, we want to teach our kids how to be accountable, we want them to grow up to be productive adults, okay, take responsibility for their own actions. Okay, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, we have two definitions: the quality or state of being accountable, and then an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility to account for one's actions. Okay. Author Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, stated accountability breeds responsibility. Okay. Why is accountability important? It builds trust. You want to build trust within your team. You want your teammates to be able to trust each other. You want your athletes to be able to trust you. So not only being accountability for our athletes, but you also need to be accountable. It improves performance. If kids are being accountable, they're showing up, they're getting better, they're in the weight room, they're showing up to practices, they're watching film, to doing everything you want them or you need them to do. It promotes ownership. If your athletes are accountable, they're taking ownership for their own actions. All this stuff inspires confidence. We want to inspire confidence because we want our kids to be confident, we want our coaches to be confident. A nice little accountability continuum I found here by Dr. Robert Anthony. Where do you stand? You can rate yourself. You would want maybe something this is something that you could do with your athletes, your team, even your coaches. On the left side here we have victim, and then on the right side here, as you're looking at it, we have accountable. On the victim side, you have blame others, you make excuses, and you just hope things to get better. An example of this, you have recommended times for the weight room for your athletes during the summer. We currently have 2 times. You can either come in the morning or afternoon. We have athletes and we even have coaches in our program that make excuses. I had to do this, I had to do that. That's not being accountable for their own actions. We would want our coaches, athletes to be on this side of the spectrum, the continuum, to be accountable, and they acknowledge reality, they own it, and they find a solution. If you're not able to make it, maybe I'll be here in the morning, but I cannot be here in the afternoon. Try to compromise. Quote here down in red, when you blame others, you give up your power to change. We want to change people from being a victim to come to the other side of the continuum and start being accountable for their own actions. An example of accountability, or not being accountable. We have 4 people here in a boat. On this side, it looks like we have a little water in the boat, a hole in the boat. We have 2 people working hard, trying to get all that water out, trying to save themselves. On the other side, we have 2 guys just kind of sit back, relax, hanging out. Sure glad the hole is not our end. Reality is, they should accept responsibility, and they should go down there and try to help out the best they can. Being accountable in your sports, things that we would want our athletes to do, and then a little bit also ourselves as coaches. Be on time. If we say we need to be there at a certain time, we should try to be there on time or early, depending on what the rules are within your program. We want our kids to study, that's in the classroom, that's for practices, that's meeting, game film, everything that we would expect our athletes to be able to do. We want our athletes to show up to class. They need to be able to learn. They need to be able to study to show up to class. Show up to practice, meetings if we have meetings. We want our athletes to stay eligible, that all corresponds with studying and showing up to class on time. Watch film if that's applicable to your sport. I know in football we expect our athletes to watch film regularly. Okay. Play your role. In parentheses I have do your job, which is something I say quite often for our offense. You know, do your job, you have your job. If you don't do your job, okay, then that's when things start to break down. And we want to be able to listen to coaches, teachers, officials, and your administrators. Okay? Okay, 6 ways of becoming accountable. Know your role, which I kind of talked about a little bit on the last slide there. If you know your role and everybody on the team knows their role, then you will be successful. Be humble. Be humble. Okay, understand that it's not about you. It's about the team. Own up to your mistakes. If you make a mistake, hey, it is what it is. Mistakes happen. No one's perfect. Manage your time. If you have to do certain things, manage. Be here in the morning. Do things in the afternoon. Do what you got to do in the evenings. Don't overcommit. Try not to get too many things on your plate. If you have 15 different things that you need to do, that might be a little bit too much, and you need to be able to manage your time accordingly so you don't overcommit yourself and you have things overlap and you can be accountable and do what you need to do. Okay? Ask for feedback. Okay? If you are one that's maybe not the most accountable, ask somebody. What can I do to manage my time so I can be more accountable for you and the team? Some accountability things that I saw in our readings. These are both from our book, Teaching Character Through Sport. On the first part it says, being accountable, what it means to be accountable. The athlete is responsible and demonstrates it by taking personal accountability and actions for what happens to him. On the flip side, we have what it means to not be accountable. Something we want to try to stay away from. The player who has not yet learned to be an athlete, when it comes to accountability, will find himself blaming others when things do not go well. We want to try to stay away from this. We want our athletes to be up here and become an athlete and be responsible. Some quotes by some coaches that I found here that I felt really apply to being accountable. This one by Mike Krzyzewski, head coach at Duke. And putting together your standards for your team. Remember that it is essential to involve your entire team. Standards are not rules issued by the boss. They are a collective identity. Remember, standards are the thing that you do all the time, and the things for which hold one another accountable. That's holding your teammates accountable. Another quote here by former coach Lenny Wilkens. The most important quality he looks for, and players that he scouts and wants on his team, is accountability. You've got to be accountable for who you are. It is too easy to blame things on someone else. Lastly here, former coach Pat Summitt. Responsibility equals accountability, which equals ownership. And a sense of ownership is the most powerful weapon a team or an organization can have. So all 3 of these coaches, they look for accountability within their programs and their players. I have a video here that'll go a little bit more in depth.
We're going to talk in this video about what we call an accountability mechanism. Firstly, accountability. Doing what you say you're going to do to the best of your ability and executing. And if you don't get it quite right, you put your hand up and say, hey, this is where I need to do better. It's not making excuses, blaming other people, or whinging and complaining about what's actually going on. It's taking ownership of something and executing it as best you possibly can and making sure that you know your job and you do your job 100% of the time. Accountability also extends to holding other people accountable. One of the biggest issues we see in a lot of teams is that athletes often see someone else perhaps not doing something exactly right, which they know is not going to benefit the team and in fact may hurt the team, but they don't do anything about it. And so being able to have an accountability conversation with a team member is absolutely critical if you want to reach the highest levels of performance. So we're going to talk about, just briefly, what an accountability mechanism is. Because you might find that lots of people talk about accountability as something that we want to do around here and have as part of our culture, but it's a lot harder to actually do if you don't have a process for it. And so a mechanism is literally a process or a system which helps you to be accountable. Here's a really simple one. One of the teams that we work with, they took this concept and they ran with it. And basically they created, under my guidance, we came up with a strategy where everybody writes down their job. So they look at, well, what is my role today? How am I going to execute this? How am I going to play my part on the team? And they literally write themselves a job description before the match. Once they've played, they come back into the change room, and the first thing they do is they start reviewing their job description, and they start evaluating themselves in a score out of 10 for each one of those tasks that they committed to doing for the team. And they then share this information with others to take it to the next step. You then get the coach to evaluate yourself, and you may even get one of your team members that plays closest with you on the field to also evaluate your behaviours. And they can also then give you an indication as to the degree to which you were able to execute those behaviours for the team. This is what accountability is. It's saying that this is the job that I wanted to do, this is how I performed, and this is how I evaluated myself. Where perhaps one of those evaluations wasn't as high as what it could be, and you identify how that perhaps led to some errors on the field or cost the team in some way in performance, you then write an actual plan for you to make an improvement in that area. So you set yourself a goal, you develop a plan, and you put that plan into practice the coming week. That is what accountability is. It is a totally different conversation to a coach just saying to you, hey, you didn't do these things very well, you need to make adjustments here, you need to improve in this area, and this is how we're going to do it this week. That type of conversation is not accountability. The accountability happens when you start reversing the conversation, where you start being the one driving your own performance. We find more often than not that is what successful people do, and it's certainly what tough athletes do. So I challenge you to find ways to be accountable and to develop accountability mechanisms. The one that I just gave you is just one example. There are lots of other ways that you can do this.
Alright, so there was Bo Hansen. Gabe kind of explains what you can do to become more accountable, things you can do within your program. They guide your athletes to become and more accepting of accountability within themselves. Okay, like he said, it's not going to teach anybody to be accountable. We as coaches just sit there and hammer the nail repeatedly, saying you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Okay, we need to guide our athletes in becoming more accountable for themselves. Okay, one last final thought here. Okay, before you start pointing fingers, okay, make sure your hands are clean. Okay, as coaches, we need to be most accountable. We need to guide our athletes and show them how to be accountable, so that hopefully that they can pick up on that, because they see what we do as coaches, and if we want them to be accountable, we need to show it and we need to demonstrate it as well. Thank you for your time. Here are my references.